For a brief period at the end of the 1960s, Frank Mari was one of the most powerful mobsters in New York City.
Known on the streets by his nickname of Frankie T, Mari was the underboss of Paul Shaka, the man who became the ultimate victor at the end of the Bonanno family's civil war. Shaka did not enjoy the power of his position for long until health reasons caught up to him, causing him to surrender the day-to-day management of the family to his underboss, Frankie T. Frankie T, the newly minted Bonanno underboss, disappeared in September of 1969 with the new consigliere, Michael Adamo. He left his Long Island home to conduct his daily mob business around 10 a.m. like he did every day, except this time he never came home. 2 weeks later, Mari's wife Jane reported his disappearance to the Nassau County Police. The men are believed to have been murdered, and to this day, their bodies have not been found. Although his disappearance marks the end of the Bonanno War, Frank Mari is almost forgotten today. He is mentioned in the FBI files from the time, and he is also listed as a soldier on the Bonanno family chart that Joe Valachi helped the government create in 1963. But after 1969, he stopped making an impact on the world after his life ended. But thanks to Nicholas Pileggi, we know a great deal about who Frank Mari was, thanks to his New York Times article called The Story of T. Pileggi is best known for writing the books Wise Guy and Casino, which were turned into classic mafia movies. But in the decades before those successes, he was a crime reporter in New York City whose articles turned mid- and low-level mob figures into three-dimensional humans that the law-abiding public now found relatable. Using Pileggi's article, combined with contemporary news accounts of the time and now declassified FBI files,
this video will cover Mari's criminal career to give you an idea of what it was like to be part of Cosa Nostra during its golden age from the 1940s through the 1960s.
Frank Mari was 43 years old when he disappeared in 1969, which puts his birth date around 1926. In Pileggi's article about the man, he interviewed numerous unnamed sources. One was only described as an ex-convict who had known Mari since childhood. This source also said that Mari was from Reggio di Calabria, which put him at an initial disadvantage for getting into the mafia because he was not Sicilian. But that was not a disqualification, because there were other well-known mobsters with the same ancestry. One that comes to mind is Albert Anastasia, who was also Calabrian. It's also very likely that when this source said Mari was from Calabria, he was referring to Mari's family and not the man himself. The United States severely limited immigration from everywhere in the early 1920s with the Emergency Quota Act and then the Immigration Act of 1924. While immigration from places like Italy was still occurring then, it was a drip in contrast to the flood that began in the 1880s.
I think it's highly likely that Frank Mari was a second-generation American. Many mobsters rising through the ranks during the 1960s all had similar backgrounds when it came to them being born in the United States.
This ex-convict source recounted a story to Pileggi about how, during an Italian festival, when Mari was still a kid, he borrowed some chairs from a local funeral parlor and then asked a mobster named Don Zaza for permission to set the chairs up near a bandstand. He then had another boy, who was part of his small gang, stay near the chairs and then charge money to whoever wanted to sit in them. Once this was done, he then gave some of the money to Don Zaza to show his appreciation. It's highly likely that this Don Zaza was Genovese soldier Rosario DiMaggio, who was known to be based out of Mott Street in Little Italy.
This act of a young boy being entrepreneurial and then voluntarily kicking up some of his earnings to the mafia impressed a lot of the older mob guys, and they began to groom him so that one day he could join their secret society.
We are not sure if he ever went to or completed high school, but the sources that spoke to Pileggi mentioned that by his teenage years, he was selling junk for the mobsters. In those days, junk was slang for heroin, which was a big business for the Bonanno family, especially then powerful capo regime Carmine Galante. Mari is also said to have been drafted into the army when World War II was near its end, but he faked being crazy and was eventually discharged with a small monthly pension. The war is often a good litmus test when it comes to seeing the character of some of these mobsters and what they thought of their country. You had guys like Carlo Gambino, who undermined the home front effort by selling black market ration books, while there were others like Albert Anastasia, who was a sergeant in the army, teaching the troops how to be an effective stevedore in preparation for the invasion of Europe. By the time Mari was 20, he was known on the streets as Frankie T.
Where the T in his nickname came from has been lost to time, as the article did not discuss it and it's not brought up in any of the FBI files.
In addition to the drug business, he also owned a sandwich shop in a rundown storefront that doubled as the base for a loan shark operation he created. Plus, he also was running a protection racket on the local businesses too. He had a business partner who was another kid his age that was also an up-and-comer in the world of the mafia. Mari would go on to marry this man's sister. By the time he was 21, Mari and his partner expanded their business into a bar on 2nd Avenue that hosted card games in the back. They also started a stick-up crew that went after jewelers. By this point, these young hoodlums were under the protection of Don Zaza and Carmine Galante. Frankie T was raking in the money with all these operations, and he kicked his wealth up to the mob higher-ups.
But money was not enough for this young man. Frankie T was ambitious, and he wanted to be a made guy. But in order to get that, he needed to display that he had the capacity to be very violent.
He would volunteer for hits and beatdowns. When a guy needed to be straightened out, he jumped at the opportunity and would hurt the target so bad that it would take 6 months for the man to recover. He would socialize and always show up at weddings and christenings with a fat envelope as his gift. And despite his rising status, he stayed local and lived in the 5-room apartment in Knickerbocker Village that he grew up in. A lot of the old-timers liked that kind of modesty. Finally, in 1956, when he was just 30 years old, he and his partner were initiated into the mafia, making them one of the last groups to get in before the Appalachian Conference closed the books for almost 20 years. His partner was sponsored by Don Zaza and became part of the Genovese family, while Mari's sponsor was Carmine Galante. He joined the Bonanno family.
I'm not really sure if the induction ceremonies back then were exactly like how Pileggi described it in his article. He made it sound like they all got together as a large group with the 5 families, and it was almost like a sports draft.
It's possible that that's how they did it back then, when there was less law enforcement scrutiny, though every other account I have heard about the ceremony makes it sound like it was done within each individual family. Greg Scarpa, who was inducted into the Profaci family around 1950, describes his induction as just being within the family. During the late 1950s and early 60s, Mari advanced through the ranks of the Bonanno family. His sponsor, Carmine Galante, became the consigliere to boss Joe Bonanno, and in 1962, Galante was sent to prison because of his involvement in the junk business. Mari was promoted to capo regime around this period. He now had 3 children, and with his ever-increasing wealth and status, he moved his family out to Searington, Long Island. Property records indicate that the house was built in 1966 with 5 bedrooms and 3 baths. Mari's neighbors described him as quiet. One of them was a cop who was aware of Mari's criminal background, but it did not bother him as the mobster kept to himself and did not bring his business home to the neighborhood. Frankie T seemed to have only 2 hobbies according to the article about his life. One was training his German Shepherd to be vicious. The other was coin collecting. At the time of his death, his rare coin collection was worth about $19,000. That amount of money in September of 1969 is worth over $167,000 today at the time of this video's publishing. But that's a rant for somewhere else. Anyway, Frankie T has found a coin from a coin dealer in Manhattan that he wanted to buy for $1,500, but before the sale went through, the dealer was robbed and the coin disappeared.
The dealer had insurance, but Frankie T was angry that he couldn't get the collectible he had his eyes on. So, he had his crew visit all the different fences in the city to see if someone came across this coin.
He eventually found out the name of the thief and then had his men stake out the man's apartment to confront him. When the thief returned home, he found 4 Bonanno enforcers waiting.
They pulled him into a car and he screamed that this was a mistake, as he was afraid that he was about to be killed.
Instead, they brought him to see Mari out on Long Island. Mari paid the man $500 for the coin and then sent him back into the city with 2 of his guys.
He was dropped off at his home unharmed.
On another occasion, there is a story that a close friend of Mari, who was not in the mob, came to him complaining about a drug dealer who was selling near a school in the Bronx. He said that the police would do nothing and asked if Mari could help. Mari asked around and found out that the dealer was not connected to anyone in the mafia. He then sent 2 of his men to the school where they beat the man. After that, he fled New York and no one sold drugs near the school ever again. Mari's world, and the world of every Bonanno family member, changed in 1964 after boss Joe Bonanno faked his kidnapping when it was exposed that he had attempted to have the bosses of 3 families killed. A civil war in the organization broke out that has become to be remembered as the Banana War. According to those that knew him, Bonanno approached Mari directly about joining his faction. But Mari, seeing that Bonanno fighting his own family, and then the other 3, if victorious, was a losing proposition, decided to join the rebellious boss, Gaspare Di Gregorio. Mari became Di Gregorio's chief enforcer, and it's said that he was the architect behind the failed attempt to ambush and assassinate Bonanno's son Bill under the guise of peace talks in 1966. During the Banana War, Mari and his hitters went to the mattresses, and he abandoned the routine he religiously kept of running his mob businesses. In July of that year, Mari barely survived an ambush on his own life when he was shot in the shoulder and a bullet skimmed his head. In November of 1967, one of the most famous murders of the Banana War occurred when 3 of Mari's men were killed with a machine gun as they ate dinner in a Queens restaurant. 4 months later, Bonanno ally Sam Perrone was killed by 2 men as he stood outside the office of his trucking company. Police suspect that the killers were Frank Mari and Jimmy Legs Episcopia. A few days later, Mari and Episcopia were arrested as they waited outside of a bar in downtown Manhattan. Both men had illegal firearms, and it's believed that they were waiting to ambush an unknown Bonanno loyalist. Mari received his first, and it would turn out, only prison sentence when he was given 3 months for the offense. As soon as he got back on the street, he was thrown back into the war. But now, he was starting to feel resentful. He was on the streets fighting the war while Gaspare Di Gregorio was laying low. Some of those that knew Mari believed that he worked behind the scenes to have the commission give Di Gregorio a vote of no confidence. The commission then selected Paul Sciacca to become the family's new boss. Sciacca's son was married to Frank Mari's niece, so the 2 had a family connection. Sciacca then promoted Mari to be his underboss, and Michael Adamo was promoted to consigliere. Future family boss Phil Rastelli was promoted to run Mari's old crew as their new capo. On the morning of September 18th, Frank Mari's wife saw him for the last time as he left his house with a small suitcase. After that, no one can say for sure when he was seen again. At the time when Nicholas Pileggi's article was written on March 29, 1970, it was noted that his wife had sold off or gave away his legitimate businesses, while his mob ones were taken over by the family. This was a sign that despite his body never being found, his family believed him to be dead. But Mari's police officer neighbor thought that he was on the lam, given that the last time he was seen he had a small suitcase. Of course, more than 50 years later, we know that he never resurfaced. The going theory is that he and Adamo were plotting to get rid of Sciacca and then take over the family for themselves. Sciacca was in poor health at this time, so it's not clear if they planned to kill him or just push him into retirement. According to an unnamed informant who spoke with the FBI 5 days after Mari and Adamo's disappearance, the men walked out of a bar in Brooklyn, but they were then assassinated shortly after, following a sit-down with the commission where the topic was their takeover of the Bonanno family. That information is all we have from the mobsters during that era. This was a different time where the overwhelming majority of made men kept their oaths of omerta. Most of the knowledge of what happened during this period died with the men who lived through it.
The main theory that has been put together by historical outsiders like myself in the decades since is that following that commission meeting, Paul Shaka became aware of the treachery that was about to unfold, and he struck first.
It's also speculated that Phil Rastelli played a role in their disappearance. Joe Iacovelli was in the Colombo family, but he told an informant, whose name is redacted, that Mari and Adamo attended a wedding and then went to a private residence for an after-party, where they were murdered in the basement and then buried. This informant claims that Colombo family member Sonny Pinto and Bonanno family capo Sonny Red Indelicado told him the same story too. September 18th was a Thursday. We don't know whose wedding it was that this story relates to, but it's possible that Thursday might have been a pre-wedding party, with the main ceremony to happen on Friday or Sunday. Mari might not have been planning to come home because of the celebration, which would explain his travel bag. Frank Mari has been immortalized to the public by Nicholas Pileggi's article, but it seems like he was spoken about amongst his crime family in the years after his death. But these were not flattering memories. Instead, his tale served as a warning for when one can become so ambitious and full of greed that it leads to their own downfall.
Mari did not have any family in the New York Mafia, which made him the first of his bloodline to get in. And he was also the last, as he encouraged his son to go to college. At the time of his disappearance, his son was in law school, studying to become an attorney.